The breath of the soul calms the storm. The spirit slivers underneath the roots of time. Voices of old carved upon the stones, and memories hidden within the twilight. A beautiful poem, guys, that I found that really, to me, sums up the conceptual element of and definition of self within paganism. Paganism from the old pagan mind, a pagan mind that has disappeared within this world amongst the general population, something that we are trying to reconnect to and see from old eyes, old perspectives, so that we can better understand the original concepts that were derived within paganism. And that's really what this video is about, and this video series that will follow on from here is trying to get back into the pagan mind, dismissing our modern perspectives on things and opening ourselves to very detailed, very precise and concise discussions on fairly advanced aspects of paganism. Now, if you want to watch this video and don't know much about paganism, feel free, but I do recommend, before watching this video, if you're not familiar with paganism, to watch my video on self that I've done before, which is a much more basic level. It's still quite complicated, but it's much more simplified, because within that, and just general refresher, basically, we see that, and none of what I said is incorrect, but it's more basic, okay? We see that the consciousness is divided into our self, or our consciousness, okay? Our awareness, which is our persona, our personality, if you wish. The version of you that's watching this video now, and the version of me that's speaking to you, the self, the self-awareness. You then have the base consciousness, which is the subconsciousness, okay? And then we have the higher consciousness also. So there's three aspects of consciousness, and almost three aspects to the soul, if you wish. Now, this is not incorrect, as I say, it's just an oversimplified version of what it means to be defined as self within paganism. However, if you grasp that, that will give you a very solid foundation. With that alone, that information alone, you will be able to rise your higher consciousness to a much higher level and become much more attuned to the spiritual world, to your gods, your beliefs, whatever. But to really gain true knowledge, ancient knowledge, hidden knowledge, secret knowledge, if you wish, you must try to expand your mind to a much greater degree. And to do that, you cannot expand yourself if you do not understand the different elements of self to their fullest degree. It is only when you understand the individual components of self that you can control them and use them to advance yourself and your experiences of the spiritual world, and thus the knowledge you gain from said experiences, and for rising your higher consciousness. Okay. Now, one of the important things to do within this video and within videos that follow that discuss in detail paganism is that we must start to, if we haven't already, let go of the impression that modern day times has left upon all of us. And if you don't think you've been influenced by the modern world, then you're not being honest with yourself, okay? We have all been influenced, not only within our own lifetimes, but our fathers, our father's fathers, so on and so forth. The people who wrote the original Eddas, for example, the Snorri Sturluson, for example, they were all influenced by the Christian perspective. Now, Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the Prose Edda, for example, he was much closer to the original pagan mind than us, obviously, but he was a Christian, he was a Catholic, and he had been living in Scandinavia, which had been at that point already Catholic for 200 years at that point. So yes, he was closer to the pagan mind than us, but he still had very strong Christian influences in the way that he presented information and the knowledge of the old ways. And so even if you yourself have lived as a hermit, completely isolated from the real world, you still will have received information from contaminated sources, if you wish. And so really what we must first of all is understand the Christian perspective of self, or soul, if you wish, but it's self as what we're looking at, and we must then dismiss them and go, well, that's the way they look at it, and it's the way that we will try to conform knowledge, because humans, it's natural for us to want to draw patterns of past experiences. If we're used to that, we try to make other things that we hear fit into that shape that we're already used to, because it's convenient and it's comfortable. But this video series is not about being comfortable, it's about pushing yourself, giving yourself a headache sometimes over conceiving possibly alien concepts, because the pagan mind as a whole is hard to get into now, because it is so alien to the modern world. So in Christianity, obviously, I'm not going to go into detail on this because it's not the focus of this video, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, but in Christianity, and we look at Christianity specifically because, of course, paganism, the type of paganism we're talking about, originated within Western Europe. And so what is Western Europe is Christian on the whole. And so as a result, the influences of our perception of paganism is predominantly Christian. Okay. Now, in Christianity, there is a clear division, a clear clarity, a lot of clarity on what the soul is and what the body is. The body is merely the physical container, if you wish, for the immortal soul. The soul is what matters. The soul is what gives you life, in essence, and the soul is what gives you, but more importantly, eternal life within the afterlife. Okay, and it's very clear that the soul and the body during life coexist with one another, but then upon death, that soul is released, and after a certain period of time, whatever period of time it is, it passes on to whatever afterlife it's destined for: heaven, hell, limbo, whatever. Okay, and so this is the Christian concept, that the soul is spiritual, the body is physical. There is no intermingling other than the fact that the soul resides within the body for a short period of time, and then when the soul transcends, it leaves behind the physical world with no connection left whatsoever. It completely disconnects from the physical, and there is no further interaction between the two. Well, in paganism, it's completely different to that. It's not like the opposite, it's just different. It's a completely different concept, because the pagans didn't believe in a soul, okay, before Christianity started to influence them. The original pagans had no concept of a soul. They had a concept of self. Now, in essence, it's in many respects the same thing, but it is different also, okay? The self within the pagan world is not a single entity. You are not just you. You are, but there's many components to yourself, some of which, in fact, have their own consciousness, believe it or not. So there are aspects to you that are part of you, but can act independently of you also. And we'll be going into, obviously, them in more detail and try to explain that to a greater degree of understanding. Okay? But as an introductory concept, there are actually 10 parts that form the pagan self, that form the soul, if you wish, the awareness, the consciousness. But more than that, in paganism, there is no soul, or awareness, if you wish, no self, without the body also. And so, in fact, the spiritual part of us, there is a spiritual element to, obviously, paganism. In fact, there's a significant aspect of spirituality. There isn't just a spiritual aspect to us that continues in essence, but there is the body as well, and they are not separate, they are together. Together they are compressed to form one single entity, but without a clear sort of union between them. That it's very difficult to see the separate components. It's only when you start to try to understand the different elements that you can see there is a division between these parts, and there is a coexistence between these parts, but that these parts interact with each other in different ways under different circumstances. Now, the concepts of self, there are 10 aspects or concepts of self within paganism. So not 3, not a higher consciousness, a consciousness and a lower or base consciousness. There are 10 elements to the concept of self within paganism. What I'm going to do is I'm going to list them now, just kind of read them out, and hopefully I'll be bothered to edit the video, and I'll put them up here so you can see how they're spelt within Old Norse, if you wish. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll try to get the pronunciations as close as possible, but guys, I don't speak Swedish or Norwegian or anything like that, or Danish. So I'm going to do my best here. Okay, so forgive me for any poor pronunciations. Okay, the first aspect of self is lik. Okay, then we have hond, hugla, mini, filgia, vad, homnia, hod, harmingia, and mengin. So there's 10 aspects to self. And what we're going to do is now sort of look at how, well, the best place to start when it comes to understanding self and the different parts of self is how, first of all, humans came into existence. We understand our origin, or at least our origin within paganism. It's much easier then to start looking at those individual components in relation to one another and how they became part of us, because we've not always been separated into 10 parts regards our definition of self. In fact, our definition of self first began as just one single part. There was only one part to us within paganism at the very beginning, and that was the element of lik, the first one that I mentioned. Now, lik is the body, okay? And it is, when one dies, in Old Norse societies, the lik is the term given to the dead body that was left over. It means corpse as well as just body. It's just literally the physical part of us, but it's still a form of our, or concept or element of our self and our definition of self. Without the body, we have nothing else to work. We can't work with anything else. And we'll get into that when I discuss leek in detail. But at the beginning, all we had was the concept of leek, because of course when we were first around, we were trees. Okay. Now this is the story of Ask and Embla. Okay. And it's important to note that the reason why there are multiple assets to ourselves is the gods did not actually create man. They did not create us. Okay? We were around before the gods could do anything with us. And we were cast out of the primordial sea of Midgard, which was, of course, the corpse of Ymir, and we landed upon the shores of the coastline at the time. And we were washed up as an ash tree for man, and as an elm tree for woman. Now this was us in our true forms. We were human at this point. We may have been trees, but you could still consider us human. Okay? We were still life. We possessed life. Okay? So actually, I suppose I'm wrong saying that all we had was leek. We also had, in some ways, ond also, which we'll get into later. But regardless, we were very, very basic, and we were simply nothing like what we conceive ourselves as today, because we were lacking significant elements of parts of our self, our definition of self. But it was at this point that, when Midgard was created, we were washed up from or cast out of the primordial sea, that the three gods who had created Midgard found us and decided to give us a much greater definition of self. They added complexity to us. They modified us in a similar way that they themselves, or their grandfather in essence, was himself given life by Orthumbla, by given awareness. He was alive when he was found, but he was like us, only really possessed physicality. But it was Orthumbla that then gave him awareness, and it's the same sort of thing that the three gods did for us. Now, normally these gods are, of course, seen as being Odin, Vili, and Ve, the three brothers, okay, the ancestors of Bor and Bori, okay. But in the older, sort of the prose aspects of Norse paganism, we actually see their names as being slightly different. Now, they are analogues to some degree, but there is some degree of discussion on who they was. Okay, so in the original prose, which is the oldest essentially sources of information that we have available to us, the gods were Odin. Okay, they were Honia. Okay, and they were Loder also. Okay, now Honia is Vili. Okay, Honia is very much, you can very easily draw parallels that Honia was in fact Vili. Okay, this is one of the few gods who survives Ragnarok. It's obviously the brother of Odin, and he was sent as a hostage after the Aesir war to Vandenheim as as a sort of a truce bargaining along with Mimir. Okay, and of course Freya came over to Asgard. Okay, also. So there was a trading of hostages essentially during the end of the Asgard-Vanir war and the truce that formed between them. But even though we know who Honia is, or Vili, there is much sort of discussion over who Lodir was. Lodir is obviously many believe to be they, and that may be very true, but it's actually a hell of a lot of, and I'll do this as a separate video, I don't want to get too bogged down, but there's a lot of evidence, if you wish, there's a lot of really strong ideas that Lodir is actually Loki, but under a different name, which is interesting. Really, really interesting to think that possibly Loki was one of the gods that helped create man. Just a little offshoot on the topic, okay? But, as I say, when we were found, we only really possessed life itself and our physicality, okay? But the gods gave us what we can now define as ourself, or within modern times, how we consider ourselves today, the different aspects of ourselves, the 10 different aspects of self that I listed prior. Now, Odin gave to us Ond, which is spirit. It's also life, okay? And it is what is found in all living things, okay? But he gave us spirit, and this is what connects us to the spiritual realms. It's essentially the formation of our higher consciousness. But he also gave us life itself in the form of breath. At this time, in early sort of pagan belief systems, Odin was actually one of the aspects he was a god of, he was the god of wind and the god of weather. And so the wind itself literally breathed life into us through Odin, and this is what gave us our higher consciousness, along with Ond, okay, which is the spiritual aspect. Honia, or Vili, okay, he gave us Hug, which is thought, and Mini, which is memory, and you'll see them paralleled, of course, within Odin's ravens, Hugin and Mugin. Hug, thought, Mini, memory. And we'll go into detail how these are important aspects of self later. He also gave us understanding and movement also. And so he contributed to us at a mental level. Odin gave us a spiritual self aspect to ourself, and Honia gave us a mental aspect to ourself. Now Lodir, who is most likely they, but also very likely Loki, in fact they all may be very much the same gods, okay, Lodir gave us something called Hamnia, okay, which can be described, I suppose, as godlikeness, as character, as appearance, as behavior. And he gave us also senses and emotion. And so he contributed to our astral level, for the senses and emotions are what are required, or give us the capacity to travel between realities. Without senses, without emotions, we cannot travel through the different realms. Okay, and so he gave us an astral level, or our subconsciousness. Odin, as I say, gave us the spiritual level, or the higher consciousness. Honia, or Vili, gave us our normal consciousness. And Lodir, they, or Loki, he gave us our astral level, which is our base consciousness, or our subconsciousness. So that is how we gain the different aspects of self. And all these were important because we needed each and every single concept, every aspect of our consciousness that we gained from the gods and that we already possessed to become who and what we are now. Without this, we simply could not be. Now, the first aspect is something that was not given to us by the gods. And this is leek. This is the physical body and the self in its most rawest state. The structure of the body that acts as the foundations and the framework, not only for our physical selves, but also as a framework to our other, more spiritual aspects. Without leek, we cannot contain any of the other aspects of consciousness. Okay? Leek is what also allows us to live and manifest and move around within the reality in the world that we do live in. We can only interact and exist within this physical world because we have physical bodies. And it's for the same reasons that we have spiritual aspects to us that allows us to transgress and move around the spiritual world also, when of course you know how to do it. And to do that, we must understand the other aspects of self, the more spiritual aspects that, of course, we're going to start looking at now. The first of one is, of course, Hond. Okay, or Hond. You'll probably hear me pronounce it as that because I forget that there is a silent H at the beginning, but Hond. And this is the spirit, or the breath, in essence. And the breath is the closest thing within us that is connected to the spiritual self. Breath in its own way is almost physical. It comes from the lungs, right? It comes from a physical process. We can feel it when we breathe on our hands. Breath is physical, but it is also spiritual also. And in fact, it is breath, or one's breath, is also considered to be one's spirit. And Ond, which represents simultaneously spirit and breath at the same time, Ond thus is the essence of life itself. We have our physical life, but then we have an awakening of this physical existence due to Ond, due to the spirit and due to the breath that was given to us by Odin during the cosmology myth. And life, in essence, thus, was given to us through not only the breath of Odin, but through the breathing of nature and the wind itself. As I mentioned before, Odin was the god of wind and weather, and as a result, wind is seen as being an aspect of breath, an aspect of the spirit. And we see this concept of breath giving an awakening to life, to physical life, giving it an awareness, if you wish, within also the cosmology belief. Also, with Ord-Humbler giving life or awareness to the gods of the Aesir, where he breathed upon them and gave them, through the breath of ecstasy, so to speak, an awareness just as we received. Now, all life as a result that is around us, in any form whatsoever, has Ond within its core. This is the spirit, this is the breath, okay? Nature itself has the quality of Ond. And the more powerful the aspect of Ond is within a physical element, the more powerful it becomes. So whether it be a rock, a stream, a marsh, a bog, a mountain, okay, an animal or human, it has Ond. And it is Ond that only gives us life through breath, but it also gives us our higher consciousness. And it gives us our higher consciousness because it connects us to everything else that has the quality of Ond. That is everything that lives, in essence, be it spiritual or physical, anything that has life, awareness to some degree. everything is connected together through its ond. Okay? And it is this, as a result, that gives us our higher consciousness, our connection with the spiritual realm and to the gods themselves. And it is the flow of ond, more importantly, that connects us. And thus it is the key to opening up the power within the voice itself. Those of you who are familiar within magic, within paganism, will know that Gauda, for example, is a practice of magic within paganism. And Gauda is about bringing effect, exerting your will upon the universe, upon the matter of the universe, to bring about effect, to bring about a desired effect. I've done a video on how magic is manifested within paganism through expression of will, essentially, and intention. But in Gauda, what's important is not the words that you use or the incantations or the rituals or whatever behind it. It is instead the vibrations and the sounds that you cause, because those vibrations and sounds of the voice are of course caused by breath. And when you do this, when you produce your voice in such a way with intention behind it, you are essentially breathing out your own spirit, your own aspect of life, and giving a part of yourself to that breath to create more life. Because anything that comes into existence is life, whether it be an animal or not. And so as a result, you'll use your voice that travels and spreads with your intention to bring existence to something, in essence. Now, ond also sustains life. Physicality, i.e. leek, is nothing really without the spiritual foundations that ond provides. But ond and all the other spiritual aspects also cannot exist without the physical framework and foundations that also leek provides. So we can see how the body interacts, or the physical aspect of self interacts with the spiritual by looking at the most base aspects of self, being leek and ond. These are the two most simple aspects of the definition of self. They require each other to be sustained. Ond sustains life, and life sustains the spirit, in essence. Next, we get into thought, hugla. Now, this is the mind, and in essence, the conscious qualities of the soul, of the self. It corresponds to the personality and the persona of the individual, and the conscious cognitive processes that define us. I.e., when we live, we think, we do what we think, and what we think is part of hugla, the thought of the mind. Okay? And so it's this analytical thinking aspect of ourselves that represents the functions of essentially this side of the brain. So one side of the brain is dedicated to hugla, in essence, okay, towards thought. And the hugla is important because thought is an extension of intention, of desire, okay, of will, okay. Without thought, you cannot have action, okay, reizu, okay. You cannot have, as I said, fuizas, you cannot have fehu, you cannot have all these other qualities without thought. And so thought is one of the most important aspects of self, because it can influence the other aspects of self quite significantly under certain circumstances. And another important quality of hugla is that it is also very free, and it flows easily between the physical, well, I suppose the physical and but more importantly within the spiritual realm. So it allows the journeys of the mind and of the intellect. And so it is the foundation to spiritual travel, to shamanic journeys, essentially, within the spiritual realm. So it is the base element that is required for not life like ond is, but for experiencing the spiritual world You cannot do it without thought. Okay? And the interesting aspect about thought is when we look at the physical world, when we look at leak, for example, we know that of course we can have a physical connection and relationship to those other things that are physical around us. For example, let's say someone was sitting here next to me, I could touch them with my hand and there would be a physical connection directly between us, and they'd be aware that I am touching them, and I'd be aware that of my intention of touching them and the feeling of it also. Okay? But the minds can also form a connection also. If you have a particularly strong hygge, for example, it is possible, even though hygge belongs to us, it is within us, and it is our own, it's possessed and is owned by the individual itself. If you have a very strong hygge, you can project, if you wish, your hygge upon others by simply thinking about them, and so you can express upon them a spiritual connection that mirrors the connection of the physical I've just described. You can have an interaction on the spiritual level through thought alone, as well as the physical. Now, the other aspect of the mind, essentially in Old Norse, was seen as being on the other side of the brain to hygge, was mimi. Mimi is represented in the raven of Mungin, for example, of Odin, and it means memory. But this is no transient memory. This is no transient idea, if you wish, that slowly fades away with time, like it does, obviously, most memories. This goes far, far deeper than that. In fact, it represents not just your memory, but the memory of your ancestors, your ancestral memory, the ability to travel as a result into the memory of the past, of ancient days. It, in essence, is our inherited memory that we do possess, and we know we possess, for example, such as our instincts and our talents, that, for example, that we inherit from those who have come before us. So this is one of the beautiful things about mimi, and the concept of pagan mimi, or pagan memory, for example, is that it was believed that we could, access memories of our ancestors, through spiritual ways, and we do. We know this through our studies of DNA, that we can inherit certain talents, for example. For example, some of us, not me, but some of us are born with the ability to create art, be it music, be it a drawing, for example. They have an inherent knowledge of how to draw something. And they know this because they were born with it, because it's an inherited memory from one of their ancestors, be it a parent of a parent, or whatever. It doesn't matter who it came from, but it's somewhere within their ancestral line, and they've inherited it. We all have our talent that we are particularly connected with, and it is mimi that represents this ancestral memory, so to speak. We also see it in instinct. People don't understand what instinct is, but instinct is literally an inherited memory, but one that goes back a long time ago. For example, it's inherited memory of things that are very important to know, because you don't get a second chance with half the stuff that are in instinct. For example, instinct is to be wary of heights within ourselves, to know not to jump off a cliff. Okay, if we did not have that instinct to know that if we jump off that cliff, we die. Right? There'd be a lot of dead people around, a lot of stupid kids and teenagers which do it anyway, but nonetheless, they know the danger, and they make that conscious decision to do such a thing, to jump into the water at the bottom of the cliff for, an adrenaline rush. But nonetheless, it instills fear in us to some extent, yes? And this is an inherited memory of trauma. And we see this going throughout it all. And so within paganism, obviously they didn't understand what DNA was, and it's different anyway. This is on a spiritual level now, where spiritual knowledge can be passed from one individual to another, as well as actual real physical knowledge, okay? Is really, I suppose, best represented with the well of Mimir, which was where basically it was where Odin sacrifices his eye for essentially ultimate wisdom. and it was the wisdom of the past and the wisdom of all of those who have gone before, essentially a magical memory that contained information all about the past. And it's this same aspect that we can derive ancestral knowledge from the past using Mimir and the aspect of Mimir within self. And this memory, it never fades away, it never goes. It's always a part of self, in the same way as if it is almost carved directly within the soul or the form of self. And so Mimir is the other half of the brain, as I say, it works in conjunction with, but also separately to, the process of thought. Mimir is very important and will have an influence on the other aspects of self also. Now, the next aspect of self, and this is where things sometimes now get a little bit more complicated to understand, so I'm just trying to keep the sun on me so you can see me, it's getting dark. There are other aspects of self also that, as I said before, have their own level or degree of consciousness, our own awareness separate to our own, but in conjunction with ourself also, because they are, in essence, a part of ourself. They are part of the defining element of ourselves. And we see the first of these being in the Filgia. Okay? The Filgia are the guardian spirits or the guides that are attached to us. In essence, they are sort of almost like the totemic animal spirits and guides that you see in other cultures, such as the Native Americans, for example. Well, pagans had the same concept, that there are, as a spiritual animal, if you wish, attached to us, a spiritual guardian spirit or guide. Okay? Now, in paganism, this guardian spirit, this Filgia, could actually be represented in 3 different forms. So it could be represented as an animal, or it could be represented as someone of your opposite sex, or as a human being, but in my case as a woman. Okay, and it could also represent itself or manifest itself in the form of an abstract form, something undescribable, something purely spiritual. And every person within paganism, every pagan, has their own individual Filgia, but they also sometimes have their own, well, no, in fact they do, that families and clans have their own Filgias also that are associated with the clan as a whole. But every individual also has their own distinct one also. As such, it is, as a guardian spirit or guide, it is an attendant spirit. But its well-being is actually intimately tied to ourselves, to its owner. If the Filgia dies, and it can die because you can interact with it, and as you'll see later, you can send it through use it for spiritual journeys. If it dies on that spiritual journey, you die too. And so you are intimately connected with this spiritual guide. But the interesting thing is, it's not a kind of two-way relationship in that sense. If you die before the Filgia, then the Filgia, and this is when you see its own personality coming into play, the Filgia, because it has its own consciousness, can exist beyond ourselves. It can remain existing on its own, and so this can pass on, it can hang around, or what it would normally do, it would pass on to one of the descendants of its previous owner. So, for example, if I'm ever lucky enough, later on in life to have a child, a son or a daughter, as and when I was come to die, there's a chance that my Filgia will pass on to my children, or more likely, possibly onto my grandchildren. Of course, they would probably have their own that they've inherited, perhaps from my parents. Okay, and so as a result, the Filgia can build this family kind of relationship with those who it guides, and can continue to guide and help a particular family line. And this is also how you see Filgias that are associated with families or clans as a whole. They are ones who have become detached from an individual who died before they did, and they've decided to guide the clan as a whole rather than an individual. Now, what's interesting about the Filgia is that its character or its form, its personality, is closely connected to the character and personality of the owner. It takes the form of the character of the person, of the qualities of the character of the individual. In many ways, as a result, it's a doppelganger. It represents your inner self to many degrees, okay? And so it will act and appear on behalf of yourself as the individual. Because remember, it does have its own consciousness. You can allow it to go off and represent you in essence. And it will do because it has your qualities bestowed upon it. Now, Filgia can also belong or appear within groups of individuals with a common cause or common belief system, for example, such as a cult, if you wish, such as the Berserkers are probably your best example on this case. For the Filgia of the Berserker would be a bear, and it would become an animal totem that the individuals of that cult or that group take upon themselves in not replacement to their own individual Filgia, but perhaps in replacement to their family's Filgia instead. And what's unique in this particular setting is, as I said, the Filgia normally takes on the qualities, the personality, and the qualities of character of the individual who it belongs to. But in the case of being part of like a group like the Berserkers, of course, as I say, within paganism, you actually then begin to adopt yourself as an individual, the traits and the personality of the Filgia itself. So it imprints on you, not the other way around. You become more like the Filgia, and like the Filgia becoming like yourself. And one of the really interesting parts of this, and this beginning then to explain how Berserkers were seen as individuals who could transform themselves through the power of shapeshifting, as well as druids, for example, who could also do the same, is that not only do you take on the personality and the character qualities of the Filgia, but just like the Filgia takes on your shape and form normally as an individual, it becomes an animal that best represents you as an individual. You then begin to take on the form of the Filgia of the group that you now belong to. And so this is where we start to see shape-shifting coming in. So if you were part of the Berserkers, you would take on the form of your totem animal, which in this case would, of course, most definitely be a bear. And you would express upon throughout yourself the qualities that this fierce animal, of course, represents. This is exactly what the Berserkers did. Now, the Filgia itself is normally perceived as being a follower. It follows a person from birth, throughout life, until death. And it also guides them not only in life, but also actually within their dreams also. However, it is also known to also travel ahead of an individual, especially someone who's more sort of attuned to the practice of Seda, for example. They can consciously tell the Filgia to go ahead of them, but sometimes the Filgia will do it anyway. It will go ahead of the individual and arrive at the destination before you do. And more often than not, it will do this in such a way that, for example, the night before you go somewhere and meet with someone, it will appear within the dreams of the individual that you're meeting as a sort of precursor to your physical presence meeting with the individual. Now, as I say, this can be better perceived when you consider the practice of Seda magic. And now, the Seda folk will always have a good relationship with their Filgia, and they will also learn not only how to sort of know what their Filgia is and be able to listen to them, they will have a direct communication, a dialogue with their Filgia also. And so the Filgia then definitely becomes very much a greater part of the person than before. And we see this when a Seda folk sends forth their mind. One of the things that Seda folk can do is they can send forth their mind ahead of themselves. So their Hugra, they can send it, as I've said before, Hugra, you can just by thinking about someone, you can have an interaction, almost like a physical interaction, but on a spiritual level. You can have an interaction with another person's hygge, and you do this typically as a sailor folk by projecting your hygge, your mind forwards. You give it the shape of your filge, okay? Because to travel within the spiritual realm, your mind must take on the form of something spiritual, and the filge is the best way of doing this. And you can send it forth not only to interact with people, but to interact physically with other things and influence events. But it goes beyond just a Seder folk also. You must also understand that when any pagan goes on a spiritual journey, a trance if you wish, or anything along these lines, that they normally will shapeshift, perhaps unknowingly, if they're not aware of it, they will shapeshift into their filge, and their filge will be their consciousness within the spiritual realm. Now, as I say, within these videos, we're trying to get away from the modern perspective of things, so we're trying to not conceive how we would conceive things with a modern influence, like Christian influence. But regardless, it is important to note here that this is essentially the closest understanding we have within paganism of an actual soul. As I say, original pagans didn't believe in souls, but this is the closest thing that we have as a soul, because this is essentially your spiritual doppelganger. It takes onto it aspects of yourself within not only its physical appearance, but its personality and the way it acts. And it is you essentially reflected within mirror form. This is why it forms an individual of an opposite gender. It's a mirror image of you. Not opposite, it's just a mirror image, a spiritual reflection of yourself. But at the same time, it is very different to the modern concept of the soul, because of course the filge leaves you upon death, okay, and can transfer to others. It doesn't follow you on your spiritual journey after your body dies. Now, let's consider another aspect of self beyond the filge. There is also something called the Vard, okay, V-A-R-D, which if you turn that V into a W, you get a ward, ward being almost like a protective shield, normally of magical quality within modern times and understandings. But that gives you a little bit of an idea to what a Vard is. It's another aspect of yourself, a spiritual one, again, that has, in essence, its own consciousness and awareness, okay, but it is a warden. But it is a warden, or a spirit that watches over you essentially and follows you again from birth until death, and can manifest itself as a person. Okay, so this does not have an animal form or an abstract form. It only manifests itself as a person. And its physical appearance of the Vard is your hamya, essentially, which we'll go into in a little while, your hamya. And this is your physical appearance, essentially, but on a spiritual level. Okay, it's essentially your true appearance that you can change with your mind. Okay. Now, on death, the Vard, unlike the filge, does not leave. Okay. It does not go with the other aspects of your spirit, so the more conscious aspect of you that goes to the underworld or otherworlds, whatever. It doesn't do this, but it remains instead with your physical body. When it does manifest itself within your physical body, it forms the Draugr, which, of course, within pop culture, many would understand as essentially the Viking zombie, which is, I suppose, not too far from the truth, but it is wrong at the same time. It's not an animated corpse, it's just a corpse with an essence of the spiritual self still left within it, and that can be communicated or controlled by a necromancy, but otherwise is inanimate. It does not interact with the physical world in any way whatsoever unless it's being controlled by a necromancer. But why would a necromancer try to control or sort of form a communication with the Vard aspect of a deceased individual? Well, they would do this because the Vard is actually connected to the memory and the hamya, that is the physical appearance, and has personality almost. It acts like the filger of the individual. So it has an imprint of you as a person within it. More importantly, as I say, it has your memories. Okay? And so a necromancer would control a Vard purely for the sort of motivation of gaining knowledge from the dead and from waking the dead. And in many ways, we see how, as a result, the body is very much a part of your spirit, your soul, your self, because the body still contains the memories of yourself, and a good chunk of your personality also in your appearance, both on the spiritual level and also see in the physical level, even after you as a conscious level has left your body. However, as I did say earlier, is more normal. It's not normal for a Vard to necessarily manifest itself within the body. It will only normally do so when it's commanded to, i.e. when the dead are woken by a necromancer. Sometimes they manifest within the body, but what's the point? They can't do anything, and so they will normally sort of manifest themselves as a wraith or a spectre around where the body is found. Okay, so typically at a grave or burial site. Okay, and this is why, typically, cemeteries and stuff like that are haunted, because that is where the Vard continue to exist pretty much forevermore. And we actually see the term Vard within the word Vard Loka, okay, which is a Gauda song. It's typically sung by practitioners of normally Seder again, but also overseers also, and it's typically sung at funerals, and it calls up the spirits to obtain knowledge from them. And so you actually, part of the old ancient pagan funeral rites was to sing the Gauda song, or get a seer, more specifically to sing the Gauda song, Vard Loka, and you would have them commune with the spirit to try to not take information from the spirit for selfish reasons, but to obtain the knowledge of that individual so it can be preserved for the clan. So that is what the Vard is, that aspect of yourself, which typically is, and usually compared to Christianity, a part of your soul that is left behind within the physical world, and explains the presence of ghosts essentially within this world. Now, Humnia is another aspect of self, and it is your shape and appearance and form, but that is distinct from your leek. So the leek is your physical body and your physical appearance and the way that people perceive you within the physical world, but your Humnia is actually how you're truly perceived by the person, normally within the spiritual realm. But if you're particularly good with Humnia, in theory you should not be able to change your physical state and your appearance, only your spiritual state. But again, berserkers come into this. We'll discuss in a little while how Humnia on a physical state could in theory be changed, and has been recorded as being able to be changed, although it's highly unusual. Now, Humnia, as I say, is essentially how your spiritual aspect is perceived, and it is that we can use our force, our hunger, to change our Humnia. Okay, so we use our mind, our process of force, that aspect of our brain, to change our Humnia. And we do this, for example, when you go into either an ecstatic trance or when you're in deep sleep. So when you're really in a state where your mind essentially leaves your body. Your body will leave your mind will leave your body behind and will take up its own appearance in the spiritual realm. Now, as discussed before, the person's mind, when it becomes detached from the body, either in ecstatic trance or within deep sleep, that person's mind takes on more often not the form of the filgia, and it does this for a particular reason. And the reason as such is to travel within the spiritual realm. Okay, you need to be in a specific form. Okay, within this physical realm, you need the form of leek, your physical body, to move around and manifest yourself. Okay, spirits don't not travel freely within this material realm. They can interact with it to some degree, but there is no free-flowing spirits as such within this realm. They need to take on a physical essence or possess something that is physical. Okay, it's the same rules apply to you. When you go to the spiritual realm, you don't have your physical body to walk around, and so you must take on a spiritual appearance. And it just happens to be that the mind typically takes on the appearance of the filger, because the filger, as I said before, is a spiritual reflection of you as an individual, and so you will normally go through the spiritual realms and your spiritual journeys as either an animal or as a person of the opposite gender, i.e. the female version of you or the male version, whichever is appropriate. And of course, then you can also take on an abstract form, but most typically you take on the animal form of your field jet. But it will change, you will go in human form from time to time. And this process of changing form is, of course, or your changing of your hunya, is your shape shifting. So the hunya is an important aspect of yourself because it is your spiritual appearance, your spiritual perception of self, ultimately. And you can use those who are powerful enough. You can use your hukra, your mind, as I say, your thought, to change your hunya. But to do so, you must understand the parts of self within Seda, and you must be able to control them. So you must fully understand all aspects of yourself if you want to be able to control your aspects of self. And so if you want to control your hunya, if you want to be able to change your appearance, change how you are projected within the spiritual realm, you first must come to a complete 100% absolute understanding of the different aspects of self. One of the reasons we're doing this video. Now, what's interesting is that we talk about Seda practitioners a lot within spirituality because they're the ones who really master this sort of spiritual journeys more so than most of us seers, okay? And in Seda practice, basically, it is possible for them to send out their mind, their hukra, okay, and to take on a form of the hunya, which would most likely be their filja, but of course they may be able to alter it if they're particularly strong Seda practitioners. And they can go about and encounter other people, not in the physical realm, but in the spiritual realm. So they can go and interact with the spiritual aspects of someone else. So if they think about the person, as I said, a hukra can interact with the hukra of another individual, and it's the same when they go, send their mind out in the form of this hunya, this spiritual appearance, which is in this essence the filja. So it's all very tightly linked. You can see why the spirit or the soul within paganism is very hard to understand because there's a lot of overlap between its different aspects, but they are separate aspects nonetheless. But you send out this hunya. One of the interesting things is that you can actually, sometimes that say the practitioner is communicating or trying to interact with someone who is conscious and aware within the spiritual realm, but the practitioner is obviously in trance and sending out their mind, because the individual that they're trying to interact with will often go sleepy and sometimes fall completely unconscious because they are being interacted with on the spiritual level, and it forces them to disengage their mind from their body, like in a deep sleep or a trance. So in essence, they are put to sleep by the Seda practitioner by sending out their hunya and interacting with them on a spiritual level. Quite interesting. Now, as I said, most, if not all people really, are limited in their physical reality to whatever their hunya is within the physical realm, that their leak, okay, their leak is limited, they cannot change their leak, okay, they can change the hunya, which is their spiritual appearance, but they cannot change their physical appearance. However, there have been accounts, obviously, within history, where there are individuals who can use their hungriya and their hunya together to change their actual leak appearance in many respects, and of course, again, I reference the berserkers in that case. However, what is to note is that when you are in the spiritual realm, you're very much in a controlled state. You control where your spirit goes if you are in a trance, and you can control your spiritual journey to an extent, at least anyway. Berserkers, however, as I say, because they do seem to have an influence over their physical state and their physical appearance, it's said that if they do transform into real bears, that it is an uncontrollable technique. They have no control over what they do when they become those bears, okay? And so that's the difference. It's a trade-off, if you know what I mean. If you are able to learn the secrets of shapeshifting in the physical world, there's a payoff for it. You have no control over what you do when you are transformed. And just before we move on to the next quality of self, it's just worth mentioning that there are 3 gods that are particularly well known to being masters in changing of their hunya, okay, changing of their spiritual appearance, which to them is their appearance, because of course they live within and reside within the spiritual realms, and that is the god Odin, the goddess Freya, and the god Loki, all 3 of which are particularly known to being masters of this practice. Now, the next quality of self to discuss is the quality described as odd, okay, or hod, as it's in Swedish. So I'll try to say its correct pronunciation. Now, what this translates into is one of two things, okay? It can translate into ecstasy, okay, or it can be translated into ecstatically raving. Both are correct translations, okay? And we actually see this because Hod is the root of the name of Odin, spelled O-D. So Odin literally comes from this very root of this word. Okay, his name comes from Od, and of course, what did Odin give to us? He gave us his breath. Okay, he gave us the breath of life. Okay, or as it's often known, the breath of ecstasy, which is the process of being awoken, essentially given awareness. But what's interesting also is that the breath of ecstasy is known to some pagans as the madness of the gods, and the other translation of Od is not just ecstasy, but ecstatically raving, which sounds like madness, doesn't it? So it's quite an interesting way of seeing how things are described. Now, Od is also, or Hod, is also the alter ego of Odin. So Odin presents himself in multiple ways. He has different faces to show us, so to speak. And one of his alter egos, as I say, is the god Hod, okay, who is the lover of Freya. So he does have a relationship with Freya, but in his alter ego form within the spiritual realm, okay? So Od is the power of divine inspiration, the ecstasy that causes the mind to transcend out of the physical realm and into the spiritual, where Od is the expanded consciousness where one experiences the deeper meaning of the world. And as a result, it is the force that makes it possible to travel between worlds. So this aspect of your spiritual self, the aspect of Od, is literally your spiritual side that can expand in its consciousness when it experiences things, and it gains essentially a greater amount of yada, essentially, as it progresses towards the process of dagas. Okay, and so Od is really the process of spiritual learning. It's where the spiritual learning is stored ultimately within yourself. And not only that, it is the aspect of you that makes it possible to travel between the worlds, because of course you must go into an ecstatic trance to be able to release your mind without going into sleep, and it is the ecstasy of Od that allows you to do this. So this is the key that unlocks your spiritual jump, if you wish, into from your physical existence into the spiritual existence. One of the final qualities of self to consider is the himangya. This is essentially the total amount of power that a person is in possession of. In many ways, you can consider it a personification of luck, but where the Nordic perception of what luck is. In Norse perception, you make your own luck, and you make luck by beginning to master your skills, your abilities, your strength, your intellect. And so Hamanja is a spiritual aspect of you that forms or helps form parts of your identity as an individual, and allows you essentially to influence the world around you to gain wealth, power, and success. But this, aspect of you, the fact that you have certain skills and abilities and strengths and that you can play on in the world, as I say, it's the concept of, yes, having luck, but taking advantage of being in a situation that presents you with opportunities, and using these acquired skills and knowledge and intellect and your power, so to speak, to turn it to your advantage and to get the most out of it. And that is what luck is to the Norse. It's taking a situation that presents itself and creating and making, but more importantly, creating the opportunities that are presented, that you can make out of a certain situation. Now, what's interesting about the Hamanja is that it can actually, it's a bit like the Filja in the sense that it doesn't go with you in essence to the next world. In fact, it can be transferred from you normally to one of your descendants. Now, of course, if you look at it from a realistic perspective, from a real life perspective, so to speak. It's just simply you passing on your knowledge and your skills, your genetics, your inherited memory, the mimi, onto your descendants in essence. But to the Norse, this was a very spiritual thing that you could literally give to those who require, those of your descendants who are worthy of it in essence. And you could also, what's interestingly, lend this quality of your spirit out to others also, who are in need of luck, essentially, are in need of your skills. And I suppose in many ways it's your ability to inspire others to borrow from your skills, so to speak, to mimic you, and as a result create their own luck when they are in need of it. And as this quality of Hamunja increases with yourself, as your ability with this improves, as your strengths improve, so to speak, it can almost be considered as almost like a supernatural ability to change your humya. It changes your spiritual appearance, and obviously an aspect of your spiritual appearance. In fact, so essentially what takes on your spiritual appearance is your filja. Your filja becomes empowered as you become empowered. And your filja at its strongest, not only when you have developed these qualities, but more importantly, when you have gone through the journeys that empower these qualities of your personality, so to speak, and you become, as a result, aware of the different parts of your soul, or yourself, your consciousness. And as you become more aware of your consciousness, aware to their existence, you can create a balance between them, empowering them more, and as a result, empowering your filja and your spiritual humya, your spiritual appearance. Now, what's important about this is that the mind within paganism is seen as containing secret, locked away knowledge that is sort of, locked away for a good reason, because with knowledge comes power. Okay, and you can gain almost unlimited power by accessing all the knowledge that is in your mind. But you can only unlock this as you increase this aspect of your spiritual self. As you increase your Hamanja, you gain essentially a key to each of the locks to the knowledge that is found within you. Your spiritual knowledge, and as you become more aware, this knowledge increases, but it's sealed away for obviously good reason. Those who gain access to the information too soon can bring about great destruction. It's only by going through the journeys of hard work, and there's no substitute for hard work, only by earning these keys, which is the only way to unlock your mind, through hard work, through developing Hamanja, through developing your skills, through life experiences, through creating your own luck. Only then can you gain access to knowledge, and that way, when you gain the knowledge, you're ready to handle it. And the last aspect of self to discuss is Mengin, which I'm just going to give a quick reference to. Mengin is the power that you yourself, man, possesses, whereas gods possess Asmengin, or Icemengin, which is the divine power, and it is about having power and belief in your self-power to bring about whatever you want. We'll talk about that in more detail in another video, because that's quite an expansive topic. But thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon.